go on to discuss probate one day, what happens to our estates when we pass.
Yes.
The very same court does adoptions.
Yes, and adoptions are obviously much more enjoyable for all of us in the legal profession, but yes, that is the same.
See. But you say as the agency looks, it appears that with the oversight of the state of Ohio statutes, attorney training and ethics that go along with this, that appears to be well established. But you just said earlier, if a person, me for example, wanted to adopt a child, let's just assume for a minute I'm a non-lawyer, I can't do this. I mean, I have to have a lawyer to adopt it, even an independent adoption, or
the lawyer has to arrange for the adoption. You don't necessarily have to be represented by an attorney as far as an adoptive parent, although I do suggest that it's an appropriate thing for you to do.
Sure.
But the actual arranging of the adoption, the filing of the petitions, has to be accomplished by an attorney because there are so many strict rules and regulations that need to be followed. It could also be done by an agency, though, as well. The agency can file that same petition.
A little different, though, than the General Division of the Common Pleas Court. I mean, a person could be before that judge, albeit on a civil or a criminal matter, and say, Your Honor, I'm representing myself, pro se.
Yes.
Doesn't happen in probate court on adoption.
Not in an adoption case, no.
Okay. All right. Good thing to know. I think you went through the screening process of the adoptive family rather thoroughly, and you mentioned home study. When somebody uses the term, Rick, open adoption, what does that mean?
In simple terms, it's when the identification of the biological parents and the adoptive parents is permitted. That is, they know each other, as opposed to confidentiality where the identities of each set are kept secret from each other. The open adoption is something that both parties need to consent to before the names are supplied to each other. And then that's the first part of it, so the identification is known. Then Ohio permits a non-binding agreement between the biological parents and the adoptive parents to perform certain acts, to be aware of certain milestones in the child's life. By non-binding, it's really not enforceable, but what they're saying is, we want this to happen, so it may be a picture on the first on the birthday and every birthday thereafter, that sort of thing. But those agreements cannot transfer or eliminate any of the parental rights that are going from one parent to the other. There can't be visitation. There can't be they go to school where I live type of thing for the biological parents. They can't retain any of the incidences of being a parent through that agreement with the adoptive parent.
But they can, the birth parents, if you will, can have some, in an open adoption, some interaction with the child's life activities while a child.
Yes, and there are an ever-increasing number of adoptions that occur within relatives. For example, maybe an aunt is adopting a niece's child because they're not in a position. So, in recognition of that existing, the traditionally in the past, before 1996, the more closed, nobody knows anything about each other.
Well, we should talk about that. Prior to 1996, and I guess the Ohio statute changed, but when you use closed, that means that the birth parents had no knowledge or were not permitted any knowledge of the adoptive parents?
Well, there was an absolute right to have the information excluded, so that there's always a way to say to a biological parent, your son or daughter wants to know who you are and where you are. They can say no, that's not going to happen, and then no information is given. There are exceptions to that because...
Yeah, what if somebody gets sick? I mean, what if you have family history background or a health background?
Exactly. The issue is that you're permitted to have non-identifying information transferred to you. So a parent on behalf of an adopted child who's between the ages of 18 and 21 can apply for that information for the child, or the adoptive person, once they reach the age of 21 and older, can apply for that themselves. So they can ask for the medical, and they can also, the biological parents can have already signed a release of information that says, if my son or daughter comes back later and asks to know who I am and where I was at the time of the adoption, I authorize you,
Okay.
probate court, to give it to them.
I see.
The transfer of information, interestingly enough, does not come from the probate court. It comes from an agency named by the probate court. Concept being that a social worker giving the information to someone of such a personal nature is more appropriate to their emotional health
Sure,
than
sure.
the court doing it in the way courts do.
But other than the birth certificate, Rick, which I assume will change when the adoption takes place, these matters of this information certainly are not public like most court records. Is that correct?
No, the adoption is still a private, confidential matter.
Okay.
Birth records, birth certificates are in fact sealed and reissued as if from birth that child's
I see.
parents were who they are
interesting.
now.
And all of this takes place in our probate court.
Well, it does, although the probate court sends the information to the Department of Health Vital Statistics that does the birth certificates.
I see.
And they are also instructed to hold the confidentiality. They're not permitted to give, in the absence of a court order, a prior birth certificate to anyone.
Okay. Well, a lot of good stuff here, Rick. I'm going to jump around here a little bit. Just kind of put a face on it, so to speak. You've been working with adoptions for how long now?
1997, I believe, was when I started working more full-time in adoptions. Did just a little bit before then. But I got involved with Building Blocks as they needed counsel, frankly, on an international level. We do international adoptions there as well. And so I've been doing international adoptions and domestic adoptions as a good part of my practice since about 1997.
If you do an international adoption, where's the jurisdiction of the court come?
Well, there is no technical jurisdiction of the court. There are different levels that you need to pass through to accomplish a foreign adoption. I'll just use Russian as an example. You need to have that same home study done, but one in such a way that the Russian government is satisfied with the information that is presented. For example, they're going to want an opinion of a psychiatrist that you are a stable person. That actually goes to our Immigration and Naturalization Service for approval of the home study and permission by them to have you bring a child into the country. Okay, so there's a financial overlay to that as well, that you have to establish that you're financially capable as well as emotionally and socially capable.
So we've got the two governments interacting here, ours and
it's through the Department of State. The Department of State also requires that that child being adopted in the foreign country is a verifiable orphan. That is, the child's parental rights have already been terminated or are non-existent.
I see.
So you cannot do a private adoption from another family in a foreign country in this manner.
But when the child comes to our county, Rick, to Medina County, does it eventually wind up in probate court like all adoptions?
It can, but the adoption, by federal law, when the adoption is in an approved manner in a foreign country and a decree of adoption is issued, that child is your child. And when that child's feet touches the United States soil, they become a citizen of the United States.
Just as if they were born here.
As long as you went over there.
I see.
And brought the child back yourself. If you didn't, then you have to do an application for citizenship. But what you have is a foreign birth certificate because it is issued by the country with you named as parents.
Right.
So we always recommend that you re-adopt the child in the United States so that you have a domestic birth certificate, and which is easier for many purposes. But that child is your child as well as a natural-born child as soon as they enter the United States.
Lawyering on a foreign adoption sounds a little complicated. I mean, certainly long-range lawyering. Have you actually literally had to physically get yourself to a foreign country to?
Oh yes, yes. We've the purpose of a lawyer in that circumstance for an agency is to establish the facilitation lines, the representatives that the families are going to have in the foreign country that will take them through the steps. So you're negotiating for their services, and then if there are some issues, some slowdown in the process or stoppage of the process that is inappropriate, then you learn to bring in the embassy, the Department of State, and try to unblock what is happening.
If I could ask you this question, is this it would seem like this would be a rather expensive process.
It is an expensive process for the families involved. probably 80 to 85% of the fees that they pay are foreign country fees, and there are some fees, of course, for the agency.
Would pay the foreign country. Rick, it's with all the legal issues withstanding, and it sounds like you've touched upon federal law, state law. With all that withstanding, working with adoptive parents must also be personally gratifying for you. You and your wife have 7 children of your own. Can you share a favorite story about this? I mean, maybe put a face on this.
Well, in the foreign sphere, there's a lot of stories. They're kind of because I spent a lot of time actually visiting orphanages, and I am surprised at the squalor that the children live in, and the excitement that they have to somebody coming in and then learning that they're calling you daddy when you walk in the door. I went to orphanages in Bulgaria where you could put your hand through the wall, where I had to live in a dirt shack where there were mules that were the mode of transportation, that sort of thing. And it is interesting. It gives you a better perspective. These children would have nothing without the people in the United States that want to adopt them. And there's over 100 million orphans throughout the world. So it's not like there is a few of them, there is a lot of them. That gratification is something that gives you reason to go on. Funny part of the story is that we happened to bring some chocolate bars to one of the orphanages, and it created chaos because they hadn't had chocolate. It was all over everywhere.
So we take something we take for granted here, but
it was kind of nice.
So it sounds like I know you have a long time practice here in Medina, Marco and Marco, and do lots of different type of legal work, but this aspect of your practice literally takes you all over the world.
Yes, it does, and frankly, it's not something that too many people know about me, about what I do. It is something I do for the children.
I see.
It is a great deal of satisfaction in uniting an adoptive couple who are, for the most part, having trouble having children of their own with a child that would otherwise not have parents.
I see.
And that combination is, when you see the smiles on all the people, it was worthwhile.
I'll bet it was. I'll bet it was. So you, not to belabor the point, but you've really become a world traveler on this aspect of it, haven't you?
Yes, I've been to the continent of Africa, to Europe, to Asia, South America, to Panama, to Guatemala. There's many places that
pretty frequent flyer.
Yes.
And when you're doing domestic work, you are stepping down the steps of 52 Public Square, right across to the courthouse in front of Judge Lone.
Yes.
So pretty interesting.
And it doesn't matter where that child comes from. That child is deserving of a good family, and the laws of Ohio and the laws of the countries that deal with this all aim at the best interests of the child.
Sure.
And that's our primary responsibility.
Well, it's a process that I think a lot of our viewers would be very interested in, Rick, and we certainly thank you for being our guest today on Law Talk. It was very informative. For the benefit of our viewers, if you'd like to see this episode again, we'll flash it on the screen for you, but go to our website at www.czclep.org. I am John Celebrezze, and thank you for viewing Law Talk.
Comments made by John's guest on Law Talk are solely those of his guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of Celebrezze Zangi Community Legal Education Project. To view this show and others, go to www.czclep.org. In the Wadsworth area, a complete listing of dates and times of this broadcast, tune in to WCTV Channel 15 or log on to wadsworthcity.com and follow the links to WCTV.
At CZClep, we're devoted to the education of today's legal issues. Fueled by the public's keen interest in our legal system and current events, CZClep is dedicated to the educational venues aimed at enhancing the understanding by all citizens, regardless of age, education, occupation, or wealth.
a function of the Celebrezze Community Legal Education Project.